Now, as you all know, this is the second such proposed final rule that's been posted by HUD in the Federal Register. The last was in, if I'm correct, March of 2015. That rule never went final. So we're here again, and we have every hope that this rule will be finalized, although with maybe some few changes based on your responses and comments to HUD. Our objective as a firm is really simple. You all who do know who we are and what we do, and you've followed us or you've been at our trainings, you know that we are extremely passionate, and we've been doing this forever, like since 1997. And we are advocates, but we're also business people. So from the advocacy side, we really wanted, at the earliest possible moment after the proposed rule hit the street, to give people the greatest understanding of it. We know that not everybody can read government jargon and follow it, and I will not lie, I myself was challenged at times reading this. But I think, and I do want to give props to HUD, because I think they did an amazing job of really sitting down and thinking this through, and that is shown through the amount of effort in them clarifying each of their positions and all of the what we call the back-end studies and all of that due diligence. So I do give them that. But unfortunately, at the same time, when you look at such a voluminous document, it does discourage people. So from the advocacy side, we wanted to offer these events as an opportunity to really give you all a chance to understand this better, and then even ask your questions, and I'll do my very best to answer them. I cannot answer anything for HUD. I want to be real clear on that. I got a phone call after the last session, and I said, no, let's be clear. I do not speak for HUD. I do not work for HUD. And with that understood, I can answer as best I can from what I know, what I think, or what I believe. Anything beyond that is really important that you put in your comments or questions to HUD according to the requirements in each of the documents. Now, do remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not looked at both of those links that were on the flyer that we blasted and others blasted, it had two links, and both of those links are actually separate documents that are both related to the proposed final rule. The first document was the final rule itself, the proposed rule itself. The second document were the benchmarks, the new safe harbors, if you will, of the proposed final rule. And even though in the final rule draft or proposed rule, they did cover these same benchmarks from an explanation kind of perspective, they had to put out the second document because this allows HUD to then change these benchmarks over time without having to change the rule itself. So the rule would still survive, and just these targets that you'd have to meet would change. So I want to make sure if you haven't read both of those, please go back and pull them. This overview is not designed to take away from your reading. It is designed to enhance what you read. Okay. With that, I'm preparing to go. I'll do my very best not to go too fast. I'm an old Chicago boy, so I do tend to talk fast naturally. All right, something just happened. I'll try. We'll figure it out. Number one, for those of you who, for whom I do, or okay, I almost said that right. It's a long day. For those of you I do not know and who do not know me or my firm, I owe you an explanation, a brief one, of who we are, so that at least you can judge for yourself whether we are truly qualified to do this work. Officially, welcome. My name is Keith Swiney. I am the president, founder, and CEO of Motivation, Inc. I have been in the real estate business for over 32 years. Affordable housing is my forte. I have done it at every level that you can imagine. And I've done real estate at almost every level you can imagine. I have managed every type of real estate with the exception of modular homes. So I've never done like single wide or double wide trailer parks, that sort of thing. That's the only thing I haven't managed, but everything else I have. Of course, we offer a number of services and things that I specialize in, and I'll point out training is my love. I love training. It is just something that is a self-fulfilling prophecy for me to be able to help others. Motivation, Inc. is a 28-year-old faith-based professional consulting and compliance firm. We've been around this a long time. We have our own compliance software that we use and license to agencies and recipients to use. We specialize in trainings for staff like fair housing, sexual harassment, customer service, leasing. And then we also do resident employment readiness and skills trainings for your residents. That's all Section 3, and most all of those are actually DOL approved curricula, and it's not easy to get that status, I'll tell you. We've been doing Section 3 compliance services at the national level since 1997, and I'm very proud of the fact that we, and I personally, have trained the State Housing and Community Development Association in 42 states, covering 84% of the United States. So again, without boasting, I would honestly believe that if there is a human who knows more about Section 3 from an on-the-ground standpoint, implementing it as a contractor, and I've actually run public housing for many years, I will tell you I'd like to meet him because I live this stuff, and it is important that you know that. A couple housekeeping points. For those of you, I know some of you, other people registered you for this event, and so you may not have all the details. That is normal. This web/call event is to cover the high level and substantial proposed rule components only. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a training. As to offer a training at this point on a proposed rule would honestly be, just wouldn't be fruitful for anybody. You will be able to submit questions, as I've indicated, via the webinar system, and I see, as I look down to my corner, there are some names and things that are popping in there. I believe each of you can see them as well, if I'm correct. These events are being recorded, as I've mentioned earlier, and we will make them available by close of business on Friday, though, as I indicated at the outset, Jeremy on my team has already started blasting these things out to everybody, and I've seen on email a number of you have gotten them. So we are doing our best to get this in your hands as fast as we can. We realize there is value. What we cannot blast to you by email will certainly be, you will find a link. We will get that out by email, and then you'll be able to follow the link to get the actual recording. I unfortunately have been fairly busy since the last session, so my team members have not been able to update me exactly what that process will be, but we will get it to you. In answer to the question that I have received the most, and right now, I will be honest, I have 76 emails sitting waiting for me, and it's growing. So this has generated a lot of Q&A, and I'm really excited about it. But the question that I have gotten most leading up to today is, when will we actually offer training on the new final rule? And as we've stated, we have been planning for this day for 22 years. The current interim rule has been in place since 1994, and we've been waiting a long time for a final rule. So believe it or not, as goofy as it may be, I developed a plan a long time ago, and I've just been waiting for the moment to execute it. So on your screen, for those of you who are on your computers, you will see these 5 targeted regional locations. I should be spanked for what I did in the last session, so I'm going to apologize to anybody who's on the phone because I forgot there are people who are just listening and aren't seeing this. So let me just read them off very quickly. We are looking at Tampa, Florida, or Miami for the Southeast region, San Diego, California, or possibly Las Vegas for the Southwest, Seattle, Washington, or even Portland, Oregon. There's that crazy comma, just keeps moving on me, for the Northwest. Then we have Chicago or possibly Michigan, some city in Michigan to be determined, that we would do the Midwest in. And then, of course, Providence, Rhode Island, or Maine. And I say, of course, because, again, Providence is a centralized city, and Rhode Island itself is a centralized state in the upper Northeast that covers 25% of all the people in the United States. So you can capture a lot of people in a 500-mile radius. 500 miles is either a short flight or a quick, 7-hour drive if you're going to drive in or out. So it is very doable. But again, all of these are targets only and are subject to change based on the time of year that the rule would go final, the affordability to attendees to attend that event. So the locale has to have certain criteria, and affordability is number one for us. And then, of course, my schedule, because it just depends on the time of year that this happens. Earlier, I had the question, when do I believe the final rule may come after the comment period expires June 3rd? My best guess would be that we would have a final rule before Thanksgiving. Part of that best guess is based on intelligence, but it's also based on my hope. I know it will take time for HUD to sift through all of the comments and then for them to come back and make some decisions about it. And we'll talk about that as we proceed. But that is my best guess. The soonest I could imagine it would probably be August, September. The reality is if it comes too close to the holiday season, all of our trainings would be pushed to January, February. We just try never to do training during the holiday season. It is very, very hard for people to travel that time of year. Me too. I don't want to do it anymore, and you do. All right, so let's dive in. Impact to all beneficiaries. These are things that everybody needs to be cognizant of as we go through this rule. And I'm going to slow down at times, trying to ensure that you comprehend what I say. Believe it or not, there are people, my team, Andre Taylor with Tailor-Made Solutions. I just love that company name. I mean, sometimes you get a company name and it's good. He did it. Andre Taylor and Tailor-Made Solutions are our webinar partners. So they are the ones who helped me put all this together and find my way into the 21st century and doing a web event. So I really want to thank them. Jeremy Harris, who works with Andre, and then Wendy Miller, she's all on as well, I believe. They're actually watching your questions and comments. So in the event that I say something that they know the answer to, they will chime in and give you an answer, literally. Don't be surprised if you see that, and when you see those names, you'll know why. So here we are. HUD is throwing out the current rule completely. 24 CFR Part 135, what we have affectionately known and loved for the last 24 years, for sure, is gone. The new regulation will be parked at 24 CFR Part 75. Purpose, who cares? It doesn't really mean anything. I wouldn't care if you parked it on the moon. All we want is a good and intelligent final rule finally. So I'm excited, and where they put it is really inconsequential. There are two new categories of Section 3 persons. This you need to wrap your mind around. They are referred to as, 1, Section 3 workers, or targeted Section 3 workers. They sound the same, but they actually have two very different meanings. We'll get into that as we go through it, as I'm trying to do this in some intelligent approach. HUD is considering two alternative compliance approaches. So all of you, not all of you, the majority of you on this call are probably community development recipients. But I know for a fact there's a whole bunch of other folks on this call. But everybody who's on the call has a vested interest in this rule and getting it right. And what HUD has done, which is very interesting, but what they've done is they've said, listen, the issue between the existing 30% new hire rule and this new rule, we want to get feedback from the people, from the recipients and other stakeholders, and let's make a decision then. So here's what it looks like. Inside of the proposed final rule, it will describe these two alternatives as to what the compliance approach will be. Alternative 1, just think of labor hours, meaning what are the hours that are worked by these Section 3 and targeted Section 3 people on these projects. Or alternative 2 would be kind of sticking with this hire approach. What percentage of these folks are new hire, what percentage of the Section 3 new hire? That's the alternate of alternative 1 and alternative 2. Based on the comments received, it will go with initially. However, please remember HUD may change these in the future. But they are giving you a chance to chime in through your comments and say, here's what we think. There's something very unique. I went through the 2015 comments that were last received. You realize, I think community development, not even talking about contractors here, because they were just non-existent really, but community development really had the fewest responses that I recognized. That means that the people who are running these community development programs didn't feel, I guess, as if they had a vested interest in really responding to it. But I would encourage you, especially because HUD is specifically saying to you, please give us feedback. Please tell us something. You should be thinking about that and how you can, for certain, give that sort of feedback. labor hours means Section 3 workers must work 25% of the hours of the total labor hours for everyone else. Everyone. Section 3 workers must work the 25%. And targeted Section 3 workers must work 5% of the total labor hours. Or HUD says both. Okay, so remember, these are alternate different things that you're looking at. New hires means 30% total new hires for Section 3 workers and 5% of the total Section 3 new hires. So you really have to think about these targeted people, the non-targeted, both. What makes the most sense to you? HUD was very clear in this document that their concern was the manipulatable part of the Section 3 new hire rule that has existed now for so long. That 30%, HUD tells us very clearly, is almost a game because it really isn't meeting the objectives of giving people what they consider to be certainly sustainable opportunities. Because a person might work 4 times, 1 week each, for a contractor or even different contractors in most cases, but that 1 week each for 4 weeks doesn't really provide them anything viable. However, if somebody worked for an entire year for a contractor, that person now has a better opportunity to have gained a marketable skill, a solid reference, and have a more likely opportunity to be a part of the permanent crew or company. That's why HUD is saying, hey, hours worked is better than that, than the 30%. So we'll talk about it as we go, and certainly your questions and comments will help me to ferret it out. Exemptions. Again, because right now I'm going to focus a bit more just on community development, I'm going to go to the second bullet. Community development recipients that receive less than $200,000 annually of total HUD funds are exempt of this new proposed Section 3 rule. HUD rationalized that there simply wasn't enough money in your projects at the end of the day, and I believe their estimate was in and around a 60% number went to payroll, that there just wasn't enough money there for any quote-unquote meaningful employment. That's my quote, not theirs. That is debatable. And what I mean by debatable is it's not enough to say, hey, there's only a little bit to eat and therefore you should starve, as opposed to feeding people what you have. Now, keep in mind, I am a compliance specialist, if you will. That's what my firm does on a really big way. And so my vantage point of looking at compliance is possibly going to be different than yours, even though we represent a lot of you all, in our client base. I still have to look at this from how do I get the job done on the ground, and are there real benefits to it? So I want you to think about the fact that even though you community development people with small amounts of cash are exempt, what I cannot tell you definitively, because it isn't clear in this document, I haven't read it at least, and I've read the document multiple times, I didn't see in there what happens when you may be awarded dollars downward, and that you as a governmental entity become a subrecipient from another recipient at, let's say, state level. State gets a certain amount of money, you get your pieces either at the county or city level. So I don't know what that means if you are a subrecipient receiving less than $200,000. It's unclear. So I would recommend that if you didn't read it, then it isn't there because I didn't see it, and maybe in your comments to HUD you should pose that question and ask for clarity on it. Okay? Section 3 workers, again, this new definition now, and I've been open with everybody. I don't like the term. I'm offended by it thoroughly. so pardon me, you're going to find that it keeps kind of getting caught in my throat, and there is a reason for that. Person whose pre-employment income is below the HUD published income limits based on eligibility for assisted housing is the rural housing authorities have to go by. And because that's how you become a Section 3 worker, you're going to get hit with that, because most of your audience for community development are coming from where? From the local housing authority. You're going to find you're going to have a lot of those folks who come in. People find it easier in community development to ensure that they're offering opportunities to public housing folks because they know that they are Section 3 people who reside there. They know they have a tangible way to verify that. Others, they always get a little skeptical. Number 2, you must reside within a qualified census tract. Census, or the Bureau of Census will determine that census tract. Keep in mind, those do change over time. A worker employed by a Section 3 business. Now, you are asking the question, just hold on to it. I can already hear it. How is that possible? You'll see as we get to it in a few moments. In dealing with especially business owners, HUD says prior arrest and conviction shall not negatively impact business owners. All other applicable laws apply. So if there's any specific laws prohibiting any person who has a particular type of criminal record from participating at some level, even as a business owner, then you would have to, of course, comply with that. Number 5, the worker must be qualified for the job. I think everybody understands that. That's pretty simple. Targeted Section 3 workers are a little different. For community development in particular, numbers 4 and 5 target you. So for community development specifically, workers employed by Section 3 businesses are all deemed to be Section 3 targeted workers, people. Or the resident has to reside or lives in the service area that you control and youth build. I know some of you have read this and you're like, oh, that whole service area thing. I hope you can make sense of it. I probably can't, but we are going to get into it in just a little while. Section 3 businesses. This is very, very new, ladies and gentlemen. So this is where you're really going to do a little bit of trying to wrap your mind around it, and we may do a little bouncing as we go just to make sure it's comfortable for you. Number 1, any business that is 51% owned by a low or very low. Any business 51% owned by a low or very low income person is a Section 3 business. Any business where over 75% of all labor hours performed for the business are being performed by low and very low income persons. Remember, this is over 75% of all labor hours performed for the business. Now, I do want to be clear. In the rule, it did not stipulate on your Section 3 contracts, on your Section 3 projects. So what I cannot tell you is that a company as a whole, everything they do, everywhere they do it, or is it just specific to you and your projects or prior HUD-funded projects? You will need to get clarity on that from HUD. The last one is any business owned at least 25% by current public housing residents is a Section 3 business. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. All of the terms that you were once familiar with, they are all gone. I'm going to let that sit there for a moment because I know for a fact some of you are marinating on this and trying to figure out what in the world did I just say and what does it mean to you. Let me give a couple of examples, and as well I'll raise a couple of thought processes. If Motivation Inc. came to you and I said, well, I am a low or very low income person who resides within your service area, and I own my business at 51%. Number 1, I would expect the governmental entity, whatever it is, a municipality or state, to say, okay, can you prove to me, show me your incorporation documents? Okay, I can do that. Number 2, if I said, hey, I'm a Section 3 business concern because 75% of all my labor hours are performed by these people, I would then suggest you would probably want to see my payroll, my prior payroll, and everybody who's on it, And you would want to confirm by some mechanism that all of these people are, quote unquote, low or very low income, meaning they reside within your service area. That you would have to do, because otherwise you would be simply awarding contracts to people, even under the self-certification process, which does survive, but you're self-certifying them, but you're doing nothing to ensure compliance. Number 3, I come to you and I say, hey, I'm a public housing resident. I own my business at 25%. Now remember, these are in order. So all of a sudden, the whole table's been turned, and you would come back to me and say, okay, prove to me you're in public housing. Well, that's easy enough. Get you a copy of my lease. Well, how do I know you own 25% of your business? Great. I'm going to show you that and based on incorporation. But you still have to figure out whether or not there are any back-end partners. So because the proposed rule does not prescribe any specific forms, you are going to have to figure out a mechanism to ask the right questions so that you are achieving the right answer. Competition based on these qualifications would, under normal circumstances, be very, very tough. I'm not certain this is going to happen. So I do want you to think this through carefully. Start thinking about what this might look like. If this survives, you're going to need some really good forms and mechanisms to capture the right data. Now, let's get into this service area definition, which is somewhat bewildering, somewhat troublesome. Although I comprehend what they're trying to do, I'm just telling you it's a troublesome issue, and I'm going to repeat what I've already said twice, so this is important. The rule says that your service area requirement starts at a 1-mile radius around your project. So you take your project, whatever that project is, whatever that individual contract is that you're looking at or that you're funding. By the way, this includes any projects that are funded whole or in part by your money, please remember. So that applicability survives the old rule to this rule, and that means this is going to be a moving target for you all based on where the project is located. If you're a county, you could be as large as can be. Man, you could be miles and miles and miles and miles of radius. And so that's part of it. The rule doesn't tell us, by the way, it doesn't say whether or not I get to cross state lines. In some cases, and I will think for a moment, Lucas Metropolitan in Lucas County, Ohio, that's where Toledo is. Lucas, if I were to draw a 1-mile radius, I hopefully capture the 5,000 population. That's easy enough. But what if I'm in a county north of Lucas or a city north of Lucas, and I have to still draw that same 1-mile radius? So there are times, specifically if you're in one of these rural counties, in which the 1-mile radius rule is going to be a challenge for you. Now, HUD says they're going to create some sort of a tool for you to be able to get you, to help you with this. I contacted my programmer, and I said to her, how would we do this in our system? You know, because as I said, I'm looking at this differently than maybe you all are. I'm trying to figure out the shortest mechanism to write. And what she said is, hey, listen, it's real easy. If you are trying to measure it properly, you can easily go in and say, starting point here is the project. Now, that's going to be a little bit of a moving target based on infrastructure work, for instance. If you're doing an infrastructure project that covers miles and miles or weeks or streets and streets, that target's going to move for you. So you're going to have to be very specific with this. But she said it's easy if it's based on how the crow flies. And for everybody who is as old as I am, you know exactly what that means. You don't normally hear that term very much anymore. But think about a bird flying in the air. If that bird is going from Canada to Florida, he doesn't go all the way over to the West Coast and sits down in California for a while and then goes over. No, the bird flies straight, the shortest distance between 2 points, a straight line. So that's something for you to think about versus are they driving? Is this a driving distance now? Because it says what? If not, if you don't capture that 5,000, you now have to increase that radius out until you do capture 5,000 persons population. And as I think of my clients in Texas, I keep referencing them because Texas is the perfect place. Wyoming, a perfect place. You know, if I'm in Idaho, if I'm in any of these places that have an awful lot of empty space between you know, houses and buildings, this becomes a very big issue. And I understand HUD's objective is to try to capture more people, but HUD spent about a page and a half talking about what people are doing based on driving, how people and how far people normally drive. It's in here. They've really done a lot of due diligence. But again, ladies and gentlemen, are we talking about 5,000 people as the crow flies, or am I having to do driving directions to meet that? In some places, those two definitions will be two very different things, rendering you two very different results. Okay? Fourth bullet says HUD will issue guidance in dealing with multiple funding sources on community development funding. This is the only thing you see that's all caps, and there's a reason why. This is big for you guys. This is really big. What will that final guidance be? Don't know. But elsewhere in this document, it does say that when multiple community development funds are in the same project, the results, those Section 3 results that are accomplished or achieved, are reported only to one program office. So if you have some CDBG and some home on some projects, which, by the way, is not impossible. We've done a lot of them. Those results only get reported to one person, to one department. And for that one department, they may love you. For the other department who doesn't get those results, they may not love you as much. So some clarity and a little bit of help on that, and that guidance is going to be very, very helpful to you all. Complaints and enforcement. Number one, HUD is eliminating the separate, as it writes, extensive complaint and compliance review process, otherwise known as the HUD Form 958 complaint register. Goes away. That's their polite way of saying it goes away. The program office who you report to, the same people who answer your questions when you need assistance, that office and probably that person will now handle your Section 3 compliance oversight. And it'll be part of their regular oversight of your organization, your entity, what have you. HUD writes this move is integral, meaning that you cannot say that we are streamlining this process if we don't stop the various tentacles people have dealt with in the past. My field office said do this, but FHEO, Section 3 and Office of Economic Opportunity said do that. And so HUD is saying no, by streamlining this, you know, we can take away all of these tentacles. So to that fact, last bullet on this page, FHEO, Fair Housing Equal Opportunity, will no longer handle any Section 3 compliance. And HUD will remove the delegation of oversight of Section 3 by the Assistant Secretary over FHEO. That's what it reads in the current interim rule. That's what it always has read, I believe, that the Secretary of HUD delegates oversight and responsibilities of Section 3 to the Assistant Secretary over FHEO. That goes away. So, you know, the good news is you don't have to argue with the folks in D.C. anymore. The bad news is the person providing you your oversight is someone you know very well, and they're probably a lot closer to you, and therefore their ability to do more monitoring reviews and that sort of thing are made easier. Benchmarks. As I said in the beginning, and for those of you who are wondering why this is flowing the way it is, because I'm flowing it through the document. That's how I always do every training and briefing we do. I try to keep everything consistent with the way that they write it. Benchmarks, otherwise known as safe harbor. This actually is covered not in the document, the proposed rule. As I said earlier, it's in a separate document. That separate rule says, Section 3, benchmarks for creating economic opportunities for low and very low income persons and eligible businesses. That, again, if you read my comment in the lower right-hand corner, this is what HUD said. They said those benchmarks may be changed not less than every 5 years by publication in the Federal Register. So HUD can come in and change these benchmarks if they see that something's not going the way in which they anticipated. All right. Remember the alternative options. These are your alternatives. Public housing assistance fiscal year and community development fiscal year or project. Alternative 1 says Section 3 labor hours must equal 25% of the total labor hours. The total labor, for all the labor hours out there, alternative 1. And targeted Section 3 labor hours must equal 5% of the total labor hours. Now remember, you have two different audiences. You have this targeted Section 3 group versus just the regular Section 3 group. That targeted group, they're saying they want 5% of them. They have to make up 5% of the total labor hours. Alternative 2, public housing assistance or other recipients based on fiscal year, 30% of the total new hires would be Section 3 workers, and 5% of the total Section 3 new hires would make up your target. So then you have this new hire thing, which again, I have to be honest with you, I absolutely agree with HUD. I mean, I can't even tell you any lies. As a compliance, professional, my job is to bring my clients into compliance. And I've had some very high dollar deals that we've satisfied with one quick new hire based on the 30% rule, right? So I'm talking to community development folks. So let me give you an illustration for those who probably don't know how the game works and why HUD wants to get rid of it. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that I'm talking about a state allocating agency for a moment. And the state throws into a project, let's say the state's going to drop into this project $40 million in home funds as an example. I'm just going to kind of use an example. Then they're going to bring in another $30 million in low-income housing tax credits or new market credits or historic credits or who cares. But they've got a lot of money in the deal. And the state says this project must be 30% new hires, and we want to make sure that we meet the current rule now I'm describing, the 10% building trades, the 3% other. And the way in which the current interim rule works is that Section 3 preference, as it's described today, is achieved how? Well, it's achieved by contractor. So each individual contractor elects that preference, or they don't, one of these preferences, right? You'd have to be 51% resident-owned, 30% new hires, or 25% subcontract, one or the other. Here's the deal. How easy is this? We're going to award this $70 million project fund. We're going to award that to a developer. The developer legitimately, legally, has two people in that development firm assigned to this project. All we needed to do is add one new hire to meet the 30%. Because 1 out of 3 equals 33%, we've met the new hire rule. With that, ladies and gentlemen, 100% of the development contract, which, by the way, also encompasses the funds for the construction contract. You would have a project 100% in compliance with one Section 3 hire. And HUD says, no, that's crap. You're not providing any viable or legitimate real opportunities for people playing that game. We want to get rid of that. Thus is the reason you see them looking at labor hours. So I hope that helps you all kind of think that through. There are a million ways to play with numbers of new hires to get that 30% and capture your project. What you all have not read and what you have not heard me talk about, there are no such things dealing with the percentages of contracts. There is no benchmark for that. Benchmarks are based solely upon either alternative 1, hours, alternative 2, human beings. Things have changed or will be changing. So how you give your comments, I really strongly recommend you all sit down in a room as a team and you really think this through. And I mean really, like process it through, pull an old project or a current project and look at the results of it and say, would we have met this requirement? And if not, how would we have met this requirement? Then you're probably going to want to call in the Housing Authority and some other nonprofits, and you're going to start asking people, hey, what does your training program look like? Because we need to find more of these Section 3 and targeted Section 3 people who are qualified for the work in order for us to get to these new benchmarks. So this isn't this is not an individual sport event, in my opinion. Locally, even statewide, this is going to be everybody, and you're going to have to come together to figure this out because you're going to need one hand to scratch the other. Why? Municipalities and states don't normally pay for training. Yes. Have they paid for training? Certainly they have. We've had some that we've done training for year over year in partnership with the Housing Authority. However, that is not the norm. So you need these people. And if you're not going to provide training to get them, somebody's going to need to, because you have a lot of weight now placed on those low and very low income persons. Reporting and other notes. Reporting will be done with other processes. So as you would normally provide your CAPER, for instance, you will issue your Section 3 report accordingly. This is designed to streamline the process, HUD says. Correct. That's absolutely correct. Instead of you going into SPEARS, which, by the way, bullet 2, HUD is looking to other reporting options for you other than reporting into SPEARS. So they're saying, hey, we know that's not probably the best option, and that forces you to do a third thing. We don't want that. We're trying to streamline this thing. Okay, great. Recipients' contract language will have to include Section 3 wording in every contract. What wording? I cannot tell you. The rule does not say. The term that we are most familiar with, Section 3 clause, does not exist, guys. Sorry, no more. Unless they somehow drag it back in, right now Section 3 clause does not exist. Next, there is no life term spelled out for Section 3 workers, targeted or otherwise, or businesses, meaning they don't seem to expire at any point. You know, I guess every year that they can say they are, unless you tell them otherwise or can prove otherwise, or unless you give comments to HUD to say, I think there needs to be a life term on this. Because honestly, I have to tell you folks, God, I hate to give away all my secrets. In 2004, I developed a mechanism by which I could create these quote-unquote Section 3 businesses owned by low and very low income persons, whether they're in public housing or outside, and make a fortune, a small fortune. And the punchline is I've heard from contractor after contractor. Last week I got the same phone call. Somebody said, hey, I got a great idea. You better be careful, ladies and gentlemen, even in community development. And in fact, I would tell you inside community development, even more than public housing, there is a risk for a bit of shenanigans. In addition to being the compliance expert, my job is also to have to ensure that we are stamping out and catching anybody attempting to defraud the circumstances. You know, the whole fraud, waste, abuse thing and the use of HUD and federal money, that's our job. So I want you to give a little thought to this, and I haven't given it up completely yet, but there's something that HUD has written here in their definition of Section 3 businesses. Somebody's going to get it. They're going to make a small fortune. I don't think it'll be me. I'm just not that guy. Lastly, no notice of these changes were sent through the HUD listserv. I've said that on every one of these events today, and I haven't seen all of my email clearly because they just keep adding up. But I'm hoping that eventually this comes out on listserv, because that really is the proper way that HUD has said to communicate with us, to stay in touch with us. We're going to send you this. I get a lot of fair housing stuff through listserv, but I have not received any such notice about this. There's my contact information. Certainly feel free to use it. I have had phone calls today. As you know, literally people are calling me while I'm on the phone with you. I find that kind of humorous. But I do answer my calls, and I always return calls. So if you don't get me, leave a message. Send an email. I'll absolutely reply. Now, today is a little long, so it may be a tonight or tomorrow event, but I'll get it back to you. It's your turn now, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions that you all have? I will turn into the system and see what I have, because I bet you there are some. Okay. Thank you. Hi, Miss Charlene. Hey, Tony, New Orleans. Hello to you. Reeves. Raleigh. Oh, my gosh, up in North Carolina. How wonderful. Thanks, guys. Aurora, Colorado. Somebody just asked for a proposal from Aurora, Colorado the other couple weeks back. I haven't heard from them, but my fees are not that cheap, so what the heck. Hey, all of you folks with your wonderful hellos, I absolutely respond to every one of these. I love you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You guys are from all over the place. You want to talk about a meeting room, this is a meeting room. Anybody need a date this weekend? I can hook you up. All right. Again, I see the person had a problem hearing. I see that Jeremy responded to you. Thank you, Jeremy, or Andre, whoever did that one. Others? Yep. Thanks, Susan, for giving advice. Will we receive a copy of this presentation? Yes, absolutely. As I indicated earlier, and thank you, Andre, for answering, we will be emailing that out. It's already been sent out to the first two groups. We will continue. All right. Somebody says, you're breaking up, we can't hear you. Okay, I believe my staff responded to that. I hope you were able to jump off the web and just go on to the call. It usually solves that issue. I had a lot of problems with audio on this one. Not a ton, but I see a few of those down here. Okay, so Dina again, and I hope I get it right, Ms. Dina or Dinah, so if I say it wrong, you will call me up and tell me I did. For clarification, is the 1 mile radius or the 5,000 only for community developments or for all Section 3? Nope, that is only a rule applying to community development recipients. Because they don't have, quote unquote, an audience of Section 3 people like let's say public housing assistance properties do. They have these residents that are automatically right there. HUD is saying, listen, your boundaries need to be a little bit different, and they always have been. So what they hadn't done in the past rule, in the current rule, it doesn't define the boundaries other than to say that your boundaries they consist of your legal boundaries for your entity. So if you were a city, that would be the city of, county of. What HUD is doing is they're saying, no, that isn't necessarily sufficient in all cases, but they are just to community development, not to you folks in dealing with public housing assistance. Mr. Miles, regarding the census tract eligibility item, is HUD assuming that all folks living in poor census tracts truly in need of Section 3 economic opportunities? Yeah, basically. I won't say all, but it does say that if you say that you're low income through a self-certification process, this is one of those things that you'd have to do. You'd have to be within that census tract. So it still protects, and I use the term loosely, Miles, it does protect people from coming from way over there to come into your county or your city and start sucking out jobs immediately. However, depending upon how far out that radius goes, it may end up capturing people anyway who are outside of census tract, but who still are part of that quote-unquote 5,000 population. Given the fact that cities like New York, oh yeah, you're right, there is such an influx of wealthier individuals moving into lower and lower and very low income neighborhoods. So I guess your point then is saying, okay, Mr. Miles, that there are people who are going to be within certain census tracts who have a crap load of dough. And should those people have a right to come in and take your jobs? Well, not necessarily. They shouldn't, because those people should not ever meet the requirements for eligibility into one of these housing programs. Remember, there is an eligibility requirement that they have to meet still, so that shouldn't be the case. But I think your question brings up a much greater issue, which is you see a lot, and I'm going to use a nasty word. Please do not hold it against me, and don't send me one text or email about it, but it's a word that people use all the time. And I hate to say it, even as a result of RAD, we're seeing it happen more. Gentrification. As we see more and more low and very low income people being forced out of the inner cities in particular, into these communities that nobody wanted to live in, right? And they were forced to. It's all they had. Demographics are changing. So whether you're in New York or you're in New Mexico, your demographics are changing. So again, it sounds to me, based on the read, that you will be responsible. Each recipient will be responsible for coming up with their own documents to ensure compliance, and therefore you're going to have to, again, think about asking the right questions now. Thanks for that question. Ms. Jenna, I hope I pronounced that right. 50% or greater owned by Section 3 eligible, or 25% or greater owned by public housing residents? Yeah, you said it right, actually. Yeah, the 51% is covering everybody who's Section 3 eligible. Anybody whose income would qualify them to come into a government-assisted, in this case public housing-assisted environment, for instance. If you meet that eligibility requirement income-wise, you're in, baby. So long as you own that business at 51% or greater, you the man or woman. Congratulations. Yeah, I read your problem. I absolutely do, Jenna, and that's part of the concern. And it's really interesting because I had a Section 3 resident call me after the morning session who just said, Keith, that's not right. And I said to them, but I've been telling you for years, prepare yourselves. Change is coming. And that's part of the issue. So now you see that 25% or greater for public housing residents pushed all the way down to the bottom. I have to say this just for the record, since I don't know. I know I don't have a ton of public housing people on here, but I know I have some. Public housing is dead. All it's waiting for is the tombstone to be placed over its head. That program is done. And one way or the other, public housing is out the door. And I think, and I honestly believe I can say this to you, this document, this proposed final rule for Section 3, long awaited for 24 years, illustrates that point. You do not see public housing at the top of the list anymore. It's time to change, folks. And that's all I can tell you. Ms. Paulette, can you please go over the differences between Section 3 labor hours and targeted Section 3 labor hours again? Absolutely, I can. Let's go. I have to find them because I don't remember all of where these things are listed. So let me see if I can get up. Oh, I'm hitting the wrong button. Everybody's trying to figure out what am I doing. All right. I should go down. Let's start off first by understanding what are the Section 3 workers versus what are the targeted Section 3 workers so that you can definitely see the difference. These normal Section 3 workers, without getting into lengthy repeat, those persons whose pre-employment income would have qualified them for assistance in this housing, in eligibility for housing. They have to reside within your census tract, or in your case, your service area. They're going to be working for a business owner. Now, I think that's where probably you're going to get hung up at the most. Next, the targeted Section 3 worker does say if you are a current public housing or Section 8 assisted housing person, you're targeted, meaning we still recognize we are assisting you with your rent, and we want to give you some preference in trying to get these opportunities. The problem is the 5% doesn't reflect that target goal. What the 5% says is the 5% that you have to meet for this targeted group means we know you're going to have a really hard time finding qualified people within this body, so we're not going to make it as difficult for you. All right? So looking at the labor hours now, oops, I went too far. Let's go back. See if I can hit ready. No, went too far. There they are. So looking at the benchmarks, Ms. Paulette, your labor hours means, and again, there's a lot of question here still, so let's not go crazy. I am not able to give you answers because we have to wait for them to come from HUD for clarity, but you have to provide a minimum of, I'll just say, this 25% of the total labor hours. What does that mean? It means for all of your staff people, every project that you put on the street, all those contracts for various work, and by the way, a lot of your community development money gets leveraged, or you are part of the leverage for someone else, maybe from a public housing project who needs some gap funding, so they come into you on their tax credit deal and say, hey, can we get some home funds? All right, so all of those hours for everybody who's involved in those projects, and that's every one of your projects that you have out, wherever your money lands, you need those hours, according to the way this reads, and your staff, everybody who's on the staff for the entity who's involved in Section 3 work or the use of HUD's money, in this case, you need all their hours. And 25% of those hours need to be made up of Section 3 labor hours. The targeted Section 3 labor hours, remember those public housing and project-based or Section 8 assisted housing and these other, those ones we just covered, 5% of those have to be made up of the total hour, that whole big picture of hours, only 5%. So the question I think that I'm also trying to read between your lines here is, how do I differentiate when I'm doing the math, my Section 3 hours, and then carve out this little group from that are my targeted people? Well, that's what's going to make this fun for you. What you just saw there, Paulette, was job security. Somebody has to do the work, my friend. Sorry. All right. I think I just answered Ms. Regina's question because it was the same as yours, Paulette. All right, Ms. Charlene Nimmons in New York. Hey, Charlene, which category does public housing residents fall under? Section 3 workers or targeted Section 3 workers? You are targeted. Congratulations. You're at the lowest economic realm. That is not the answer. I know you didn't want to hear, Ms. Charlene, because I know what an advocate you are. However, my friend, that little speech I just gave a few minutes ago was driven to that whole audience of public housing people. Yeah, you're targeted, but you're targeted at 5% of the total labor hours. So let's just do a little math, Ms. Charlene. If I were to come to New York and I was going to grab one of your brand new RAD developments, let's say, and let's say this is one of these simple $500 million projects, okay? Not a big one, just simple $500 million. Only 5% of those total labor hours have to be geared. Now, compare that to NYCHA's last Section 3 policy and their REASE policy, which was 15%, if my memory is correct, 15% of the total hours on the project were supposed to be made up of NYCHA residents. That was the rule forever and a day. I don't know that they've changed it, but that 15%, you all just got cut by 10% based on the federal guidance here. Mr. Marvin, will this new change be applicable to existing contracts? No, it will not, or new contracts only. It should be after the rule is approved. Somewhere during that period, HUD will have to tell you what the official cutoff is and how to manage that, Marvin. If you have an existing contract right now, as you've indicated here, you will not be able to go back and change it. There's no way I, under contract with you, would allow that without a substantial change order, okay? So you are right in your comments. Existing contractors may not agree to these changes. They won't have to. However, there is going to be some sort of a period here where old contracts will burn off and new contracts will have to start under the new terms, whatever they are. The most important thing I believe all of you all can do is start thinking about how are you going to educate your contractors and even your residents about these changes. This is substantial for vendors in particular. How you meet a Section 3 business definition, that's huge for your current contractor base. By the way, that's huge for you all. You know, the people in community development say to me the most that they have the hardest time trying to get these quote-unquote Section 3 contracts. Well, boy, if you thought it was hard before, it's about to get real hard now because you only have 3 definitions. They're either 51% owned and operated by a low or very low-income person. Good luck getting bonding out of that. 75% of all the labor hours are made up of that group of people. That leaves you 25% non-low-income people. And if you go off of the language that HUD specifically wrote, I'm not gonna screw this up, I hope. HUD went through a very clear definition here, and all of their dissertation makes clear that most of the unskilled jobs will go to these Section 3 people. So if that's the case, and I have to have 75% of all my labor hours to go towards the Section 3 folks in order to be a Section 3 business, good luck finding bonding in the 25%. And the reason I keep using the term bonding, you all know it. You know these projects have a bond requirement. You can't just come in and contract $2, $3, $4, $50 million worth of work without a payment and performance bond. How are you going to get your Section 3 accomplished? I'm not being smart, I'm not trying to be a jerk, and I'm not insulting HUD. The reality is, I don't see it. And you trust me, I've lost sleep since this thing dropped. I've lost a lot of it. I don't know how you're going to make that, ladies and gentlemen, especially you community development folks. Let me be mindful of my time. Okay. I currently use my Section 3 clause as a certification in every applicable contract. How do I replace that? Good question. Let me see who asked that. Was that Raymond? Raymond, listen, how do you replace it? HUD doesn't tell you that. I shouldn't say because to say because would be lying on HUD. And I won't do that because I know they're listening. So let me be fair. The one piece of the Section 3 clause, and this is the third rail of Section 3, and I have done really good today to stay away from it. I was going to wait till this afternoon when it was late because contractors, they don't care. It's the union piece. Not mentioned anywhere in this document. The word union doesn't show up, whether it's an employment union, right, of these agencies, these recipients, or if it's a trade local union, it doesn't mention it. In that Section 3 clause, my friend Raymond, it specifically required in Section C that even those folks, these people with the specific labor agreements, that they had to still insure, right? That these notices were provided, and this group of people over here called Section 3 people, that they were being considered. I don't have an answer for you, my friend. I think you're going to have to ask HUD, okay, now what do we do? Now, keep in mind, Raymond, I can see your name, but I have no idea where in the world you are. So the union issue may not be important to you. The Section 3 clause is a minimum requirement under the current interim rule. So you're doing the right thing. Congratulations. But there is language in that Section 3 clause that has had a lot of value to a lot of people. If you're not in a northern state where they have unions or California, you probably should go talk to those folks, and they'll tell you what the value has been to try to get some of their people onto these these union-covered jobs. Ms. Jenna Richmond, public housing residents are considered targeted Section 3? Yeah, sure they are. Think about this. The current language in the interim rule reads, persons assisted with their housing by the government. I always like to correct people when they say that wrong because they always say HUD, and that's not what it says. It says person assisted with their housing by the government. Now, that meant a whole different group of people. I'd like to have that concern because those folks at USDA, in the Farmers Home program, that sort of thing, they are assisted with their housing. You know what is not? Tax credits. People always think tax credit is a housing assistance. No, it isn't. It's a tax shelter. That's what it is. Nothing to do with it. If you told people tomorrow they could get a tax credit for building toilets, everybody would stop building houses and build toilets. So don't get me started. Listen, for your benefit, I think what you all really have to begin to think about is what's going to happen from a real how do I do this perspective the day after the final rule is set. If it's this rule, if it looks exactly like this, whether it's alternative 1 or 2, something tells me it would be 1. HUD didn't spend all that time justifying 1 for no reason. Nothing inside of this proposed final rule in any way is positive about alternative 2, these new hires. In fact, everything HUD wrote is a negative, rightfully so. However, you all have a real job to do, and I'm really not joking on this one. I promise you. You better sit down and think this through. I mean, you start running scenarios in there. Pretend that you're running, an NFL team, and you're in the Super Bowl, and you got to figure out the right play. You need to have that play figured out in advance. So run some scenarios. If you need help, call me. I'm always happy to offer any advice. I do a lot of driving, so I'm free a lot to talk to you. All right, you talked a lot about community development funds, and I'm assuming the rules are the same for public housing agencies. No, they're not, because public housing agencies have just a slight bit of a difference, but most of them remain the same in terms of your benchmarks. So let's be clear, benchmarks, identical. Yep, identical. Everybody's got to hit that 25 and 5, so those are the same, my friend. So Jenna, sorry, they are. Miss Valerie, hello, just to be clear, we make no changes until final rule. That is correct, my friend. Nobody within the earshot of my voice or tell anybody who doesn't hear it, you do nothing until we get a final rule, because like in 2015, who says that? In 2015, they never finalized it. So we all sat around holding our breath and we got nothing. So don't do that. Don't make any changes. Don't worry about it, but start thinking and planning. There's nothing wrong with planning ahead and being prepared. All right, this one is a little long for me, guys. Let me see. Staff. I don't remember. Oh, okay. I'm doing okay. We cut off at 3 o'clock, so I need to remember that. I just don't want to mess you up. Okay, here we go. In my brief review of the summary of the proposed rule, it looked to me like the 20,000 threshold, project-related rather than HUD looking at the entire amount an agency receives. Did I misunderstand this? Let me take yours in parts because you do have a lot written here. Short answer is yes. The $200,000 threshold is also a cutoff. It isn't just a threshold for who does what in a project. It's a threshold for who does what relative to the rules of all. So when I say this is confusing, your confusion is absolutely correct. I can't tell you the number of times I had to review that, Nancy, to understand what it was actually saying. But that threshold is accurate. So it's designed, and I know because of those intel I got, this was designed so that it could really give some relief to these really small community development agencies that reportedly, according to what we wrote, said they were having very difficult time. So, in other words, if we think about it, 200,000 to section 5. In your case, this is going to get interesting. So, if you remember, again, I'm taking this in parts, Miss Nancy. There's a part of the rule, and you don't hear me talking about it, and I haven't talked about it because anybody who gets it knows they have it. Others who don't just get confused. The lead-based paint hazards in healthy homes, okay? So let's pretend that you're doing nothing but a lead abatement program, and that is a separate project, quote unquote. It says that regardless of the dollar amount on that project, the rules under Section 3 will always apply. Okay, I'm going to let you marinate on that. So regardless of it, so that $200,000 threshold does have value, but you as an agency, because you receive in excess of it, you must still comply across the board. Everything. Now, are you still a little confused? Oh, I agree with you. So don't let me tell you a lie. Put that in your comments to HUD and ask for clarity. Again, no disrespect to HUD. I can't imagine how hard it must be to sit in a room with people and you try to piece this thing together. And you will end up making some assumptions because you've talked about it so many times. Heck, you think everybody knows what you're talking about. And when you translate that into writing, even when you read it, you don't see it. So absolutely put that in there. But that's my read. That's all I can answer. All right. It's almost impossible to meet Section 3 requirements or regulations when you're replacing an HVO system. For example, the contractor won't be hiring a project. All right, let me read this out loud for everybody's benefit now. I was just trying to make sure I didn't already answer it. Our projects are usually very small, Nancy says, 40,000 or so, and last a few days or a few weeks. Correct. Most of these Section 3 projects are very, very short term at best, so you are correct in that, Nancy. It is almost impossible to meet Section 3 regulations when you're replacing an HVAC system. For example, the contractor won't be hiring for a project that small. Further, our economy is very vital. Okay, our economy is very vital, and there are very few Section 3 contractors in our area. Okay, I thought that's where you were leading. The way I read the proposed rule, the new regs probably wouldn't apply to small projects unless they are lead or right. Okay, all right. So here's the question, because the project size could say one thing. Now, let's just think it through. If the project size says, I'm only going to be $40,000, but the agency received $1 million, let's say, from HUD, isn't there a risk that recipients in that scenario will start writing these low value, under $200,000 contracts and staying so they would never have to comply? And therefore, at the end of their fiscal year, they send HUD a big goose egg saying, nope, didn't do anything. None of these contracts were able to do anything. That's my logic for going to the direction I did. I don't disagree. The confusion is in the writing, now that's for sure. But I think if you apply logic to it, it wouldn't make any sense that we're going to start excluding all the $200,000 projects. There are certain projects that get funded separately. That may be what you're not thinking about. There are these old 811s and 202 projects that are funded very, very separately. These are those other recipients that HUD describes in the proposed final rule, Nancy. So there are people who will only get certain amounts of money from HUD who would then be excluded. That's my read. Now, Mr. Swiney could be wrong because I've been wrong about a bunch of stuff in my life. A bunch. I mean, a lot. I once bought a Ford. I thought that was a good idea. I'm just kidding. Nothing against Ford for any of you people in Michigan. All right. Working on this site. Is that a two-part question I'm getting? I don't know. Can't answer that one. Working on the site. I don't know what's before that. Can you explain alternative 2? Yes. It should still be on your screen right now if you're looking at it, Jenna. So that alternative 2 is very much like what's happening right now in the interim rule we are under. 30% of the total new hires for Section 3 workers is the current rule you have right now. So the rule says 30% of all new hires must be Section 3. That's all that says. Except the 5% of the total Section 3 new hires have to be that targeted group again. So that 5% means you have to have this isolated group of people who are public housing or in a Section 8 assisted housing, you know, live within the area, that sort of thing. So it's really the same 30% rule we have now. We're just going to do this little carve out to see if we can find that 5% within the 30%. I hope that helps. Okay, absolutely. Miss Charlene, if you dropped out for some reason, I will get back to you. All right, Miss Jenna, you are active this afternoon, my friend. She says, how will it be possible to track work hours associated with professional service contracts? Number one, they are exempt. Professional service contracts are exempt. Why? HUD says there is a very small likelihood that they're going to produce any Section 3 activity. However, if you were on either of my other 2 sessions, I can prove you wrong immediately. I've got architects. We have attorneys who've hired these folks. They're happy to do so. By the way, they're the easiest to track hours on. Why? Because in most cases, we have attorneys, we have engineers, we have other people who have billable hours. Billable hours are easy to track, labor hours, so that's the easiest thing in my book. Listen, you want my 2 cents? I don't let anybody off the hook. HUD's investment into these communities, large or small, is sometimes the only money they get. Every dime, every penny of that money, where possible, should go to the benefit of strengthening those communities. That's built into HUD's very nature and creation. So I do have a problem, but yes, ma'am, it is currently exempt. You don't have to worry about professional service contracts. I would be very careful about starting to labor everything professional services to get out of this. And do the labor hours encompass PHA hiring? Yes, it does. A Section 3 and targeted Section 3 people for PHA employees. Absolutely. It includes those and all the hours that everybody in the agency works. Does that mean we now need to track employee hours at the PHA in order to be in compliance with Alternative 1? Yes, ma'am. You are very smart. That is correct. As in the past, you've counted number of heads that were Section 3. Now you have to go to counting hours. Very different, a lot more work. But don't forget, Ms. Jenna, now that also includes everybody else who does work for you. Don't forget the exterminator. Don't forget the glass man. Don't forget the screen repair guy. Don't forget the people who come and buff floors and the landscaper. Definitely don't forget the landscaper. All these people still count. So you are going to be doing a lot of hours counting. Come up with a good system. Regina, we rarely have projects large enough that require hiring new people. Contractors have all their own staff already. This is going to be impossible. For some of you, I absolutely agree, Miss Regina. I don't even disagree one bit, I would say to you. Good luck. That's all I can say to you. Good luck, or issue some comments to HUD if you think there's a better way of doing it. That's the purpose of the comment period. Just say whatever you want to say. You know, they can either take it or throw it in the trash, but at least you know you got it off your chest. That's what I do. Mr. Marvin, as it is, it's already difficult to have vendors submit bids because of our requirement. This adds another obstacle or hurdle for vendors. No, sir. I disagree with you, Mr. Marvin. Mr. Marvin, I'm going to ask you to think about this differently. Look at the time so my staff doesn't yell at me. Okay. Here's the deal, guys. I'm a contractor. 99.8% of all of my company's revenues, so that you clear, and I'm giving you honest disclosure, are all Section 3 related business work. Whether it's resident training, whether it's compliance management, whether it's staff training, contractor training, I don't care. It's all Section 3. I make a freaking fortune off Section 3. If I came to your door and you were writing checks and I needed your check, Mr. Marvin, I'm going to do whatever it is you tell me to do to get that check. The problem I see, and I say this honestly, the problem I see is there's no motivation whatsoever for your contractors to ever elect one of these priority preferences as a Section 3 business. They don't care. You know why? Because you're going to award that contract to somebody because the work has to get done. If you had written a different rule and you told me I absolutely positively had to hire these people, they would figure it out. Your cost of every project would go up because, as earlier stated, they already have their staff. If they have to add on, they're just going to bump up the price to do so. Okay, great. That's not what this proposed rule does, though, Marvin. The proposed rule sets forth a streamlined process, and it redefines what is a Section 3 business. And honestly, what I think it does is it pushes all the Section 3 people out the door. Now, somebody just got really mad at me. I know they did. I can hear the cussing and screaming. But I'm sorry, guys. Again, I don't know that you do what I do. I do analysis for implementation. Nothing in this rule inures to the benefit of the low or very low income people. Everything in this rule, as it reads right now, says you do it or you don't. You don't, we keep it moving. There's no penalty. You didn't hear anything about a penalty. Did you hear me read that? Because if I did, if it was in here, I'd have read it to you. I'd have put it in here. There's no penalty. Good luck, Mr. Marvin. You got work to do, brother. Okay. Oh, you right, Miss Melissa. If HUD goes with alternative 2, is there a length of time the new hire must be employed to count as a new hire, Section 3 or not? What if they work a day and they are let go due to poor quality of work? Well, the good news, Miss Melissa, is, again, alternative 2 is dealing with the current rule that's already in place, 30% new hire rule. You get to count them. Congratulations. It's the oldest trick in the book. I won't be nasty, and I'll be nameless. There was a housing authority who reported having 400 new hires a number of years ago. In 1 year, they said they have 400 new hires. The punchline to this joke is that agency had already demolished almost every bit of its family housing. So all it had left was senior disabled. So where they got 400 new hires, I don't know until I called and asked. And what they had done is they had counted one person like 300 some odd times. It was like 380 times if I remember correctly, because that one person worked an hour or two on this contract, an hour or two for that contractor or vendor, an hour or two over there, and they had to count them. They got to count them every time. I'll quote Mr. Rafiq. I one day was at the HUD office. Mr. Rafiq caught me. We're going up the elevator, and he stopped and he says, "That's ridiculous," and he was right. But that's the issue. The good news is, under Alternative 2, the games continue. You still get to count that person. If they showed up for work that day and got fired 1 minute after they arrived because they weren't dressed properly or something, you still got to count them. You know why? Because they had to pay them for that 1 minute. That's what HUD's trying to get rid of. I've got a lot of comments about the internet failing or something, and I've been sitting here watching my system, which you all can't see, but I'm getting constant emails, so I know my server hasn't dropped, and unless it's something else, we haven't had this issue all day. So I don't know, gentlemen, if we have reached capacity and blown out their system, we need to talk about going to a different system, but I sure hope that's not it. So my apologies, everyone, if we are having those problems. We will do our very best. Last couple questions. Ms. Charlene again, up in New York. Thanks for coming back. Does the Section 3 business concern breakdown, according to HUD, totally change from what it used to be 51% owned by residents? Let's break your question into 2 parts or 3 because I can see the balance of it. The first answer, Charlene, is yeah, right, it has changed. This breakdown has changed drastically. That 51% is owned by, when you use the term resident, HUD's saying any low or very low income person. HUD doesn't use the term Section 3 resident any longer. It's nowhere in this proposed rule. You are a Section 3 worker. Yes, they do give you the term person every now and then, but for the purposes of benchmarking, you're not a person, you are a worker. So therefore, it has changed and changed drastically. So sorry, that's the case. Part 2, joint ventures. You are a glutton for punishment, Charlene. 25% of the project must be completed by Section 3 owned or 30% of the new hire requirements. All right, well, let's break it down. Yes, the joint venture would be alive and well. Here's your problem. 25% is a minimum component of the new proposed rule. That means your partner could potentially have 75% of the deal. Under Section 3, if you remember, Charlene, in particular, the rest of you, if you've never seen this, under the rule, it had an entire component driven to and talking about the value of joint venture partnerships with Section 3 entities. That part of it had some very specific rules to it. It said that there had to be a written joint venture agreement where 2 parties would come together, not necessarily for permanency, but to at least pursue this one particular contract. It was on the basis of bringing joint efforts, but not necessarily joint profit. All right, so remember that. There will be profit, but not everything's equal. It can't be. Number 4, there were 2 parts to the joint venture rule that really took it out of the realm for most people, intelligent business people. It said that the Section 3 component must perform 25% of the work and be paid proportionate to that work. And then the last one, if that didn't kill it, this will. It says that entity, that Section 3 entity, of course, it has to be defined. 51% owned, and that means profit, because it isn't enough to just own interest. That's why I'm saying to you, Charlene, looking at the way that this is written, it isn't enough to say that you are a 25% owner of a business, or even 51%. If you're actually paying fees or some other amount out to other people, you may own 100% of the business but make none of the profit. So be careful on that one, my friend. Miss Paulette Guilfoyle. Yes, all of these, I'm going to do my best now. On all the answers, that I can't guarantee you except they'll be on the recording. So that's a long, boring listen, but I'm sorry, my mama didn't give me a better voice. But yes, all of my answers are going to be there. And yes, thank you, Andre, for answering. She will receive that, a copy of the recording via email. Oh, yeah, thank you, Mr. Andre. So they will receive a copy of the recording via email as well. That's cool business. Last question I believe I have. Yes, Mr. John Schomer, I believe it is. So if we are not able to hit the benchmarks that are proposed under Alternative 1 or Alternate 2, there is no penalty, there is none listed. That's an easy answer, Mr. John. Yeah, there's nothing listed. So again, that will fall back to whoever your program office is, who your person is, and I guess their decision-making based on the sanctions that may apply to you for failure to comply with any of the HUD rules. That would be in their hands. Again, this doesn't spell that out in clear language, but I believe that that's a very honest answer. Ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you. In that answer, the question that just popped in, yes, you will receive an email on all of this. Okay, let me thank you all.